And then a few days after the webinar, you're going to get an email with a link to the recording. We're also hosting the recording of this session and all of our previous sessions from the full webinar series up on our landing page. And I will pop a link to that in the chat at the end of the session. So I'm pleased to welcome Lisa Hay. Lisa's been the Latin Learning Specialist at CSCP since 2019, primarily writing materials such as the new edition of the Cambridge Latin course, which we're here to talk about, and the resources around it. And Lisa spent almost 2 decades in the classroom prior to that, so has a wealth of experience. So Lisa, over to you.
It does sound like a long time, that, but it's not. I'm pretty certain there's a couple of names on this call that I recognise who probably spent longer in the classroom. Yeah, so welcome, hello. Good to see you. And let me just start by sharing this. Thank you for coming. And I've got, I guess, a couple of apologies, I suppose, to start off with, is that being from the UK, first of all, I may be likely to refer to this as books rather than units. Please call me up on every slip up I make. Just tell me. But I would like to apologize in advance on that one. And oh, sorry, one second. And also, I am going to try and keep an eye on these questions. But if there is anything, please do let us know, and we'll try and answer everything that we can at the end. Okay, so language matters. As said, I'm the Latin Learning Specialist at CSCP and have been heading up the writing team working on the new edition of the CLC. We have got some North American representation on that writing team in the form of Ben Joffe, who has been helping us out with some North American specific material for us. Primarily in today's session, I'm going to be talking about units 1 and 2, although there are bits and pieces from unit 3 that are going to make an appearance as well. I am happy to take any questions on units 3, 4 and continuation material as well, if anybody has any questions about that. So let's get started. First of all, the standard disclaimer that we've been putting on all our webinars, which is that this isn't everything. 45 minutes might sound like a long time to talk about language, but I'm sure this audience needs no explanation that I think all of us could talk about Latin language for an awful lot longer than 45 minutes. So if there is anything that you would specifically like me to talk about or to offer some additional information about, please just drop me an email and I'm more than happy to give you any further information or discuss anything further. So this is the highlights, a few headlines, but there is more. There is more. So if I've missed out your favorite thing, please do say. So these are the areas that we're going to be having a look at today. Primarily, we're going to be looking at any adaptations to the language mapping for the series. Again, primarily looking at the first 2 units. How the material is being presented and the changes that we've made. The opportunities that we're building in for developing a broad range of reading skills. Some of you might know that reading skills are something I'm particularly interested in. And the final point, the role of the student as an active translator. So how do we really make sure that this is a course fit for the future of the subject, for not just translating Latin, but genuinely reading Latin, authentic texts, and engaging with them in a critical manner when we do so. So let's get started. First of all, looking at the language map for the new edition, there have been a few changes to the language progression and a few changes to vocabulary as we go along. Now, those of you who are already using the 5th edition are not going to notice as many changes as those of you who might be moving from the 4th to the 6th. So some of the big things that have happened are not that big if you're moving from the 5th. Mostly you'll notice minimal mapping changes. What we have done primarily with the language map is move things to places where we think they can be better used. So These are a few examples of what we've done. The ablative is introduced by name now in Unit 1. And the reason that we have done that, along with prepositional use, so we've moved that section on prepositions into Unit 1, is because in talking to teachers and also from my own practice, we were thinking about the problems that may be caused from students thinking that what they're looking at in these prepositional phrases throughout Book 1 is the dative. And this way we can head them off at the pass by introducing the ablative a little bit earlier. The prepositional use is the only use that is introduced at that point, but it is built on as the students go through the subsequent units. Now, with the term ablative in, it does mean that our noun tables are now full from the end of, well, from the back of Unit 2. So there will be a complete tabulation of paradigms from that point if teachers want to use it, if that is something that they're interested in using with their students. Of course, there is notes saying you've only met the ablative in this context, and that gets amended as they progress through the course. So hopefully this will just facilitate some sensible opportunities for teachers to drop the ablative in as a non-threatening manner, to build upon it, and to head off any misconceptions that might arise from the fact that there's such a gap between meeting the dative and then the ablative later on. For a different reason, so that was very much a linguistic reason. For a very different reason, we've moved direct questions to early in Unit 1 to facilitate classroom talk. We know that a lot of people use classroom dialogue very effectively with their students, and I think it's an excellent teaching method. It does pay a huge amount of, the rewards are great on using this. We could have another session on talking Latin, spoken Latin, but moving the direct questions just means that students have got that confidence in those question words and how questions are structured from a much earlier stage in the course. So we've got that in now much earlier on for you to use from stage 4 onwards. So 2 different considerations there, a linguistic move and also a classroom practice move as well. And throughout, this is something that you might not notice, but has been adapted throughout the course, is improved seeding. So what do I mean by seeding? These are the structures that are built on throughout reading and support some of the about the languages. So these are our changing sentence structures, the progression of the ways in which words are used. So I'll take the infinitive as an example here, is once students have met infinitives in stage 13, infinitives are used in a variety of different ways, moving across units 2 and 3, and eventually building into indirect statements, so accusative and infinitive construction, which has its own ATL. But between those 2 points, between stage 13 and eventual embedding of accusative and infinitive, the infinitive is used in a variety of different ways which build up as they go through. And we have looked at that kind of seeding, that kind of progression within the text of particular language features. And to take the infinitive as an example, we have improved, we hope, the way in which multiple accusatives are used in complex sentences with the infinitive, so that when they reach the accusative and infinitive construction, it is something that they can deal with in a very straightforward manner, very quickly, and with minimal confusion over what is happening. And so that's something that we have really looked at. We have also looked at, I have very boring spreadsheets if anyone's particularly interested, things like varying the cases that are used for pronouns, for example, and making sure that there is good coverage across the books. This is something, of course, that is much easier to achieve these days, using digital technology to help us with this, to map changes, to track our usages of things, which of course the original team were all doing on paper and in their heads, which is it makes you appreciate what they did in the beginning, I tell you. With the vocabulary, we've taken on board a lot of teachers' comments and concerns here about the type of vocabulary, where it's introduced, and the extent of the vocabulary. We have tried to reduce the number of words which only occur across the whole series, maybe 3 times or 4 times. These are the words that students don't necessarily remember. although some of them are easier to recall than others given the structures around them. Certainly, these are the more challenging words, and they tend to be less common in Latin overall. So we have spent time reducing those lower recurring words. We've taken a lot of our guidance from the Dickinson 500 and 1000 lists to make sure that we've got good coverage moving towards authentic texts, that the word coverage is focusing on these words. With the unique words that occur in the Latin course, and maybe occur once or twice and then never again, but in particular once, we have tried to keep them. They give flavor to the course. They're the ones that bring it alive, and they're the reason that there's a whole generation of people who know about a polyspaston, that most Romans never encountered that word, but our students are very, very happy with it. We've kept those words. It's what the course is all about, is the fun around the language as well. And also, these are the words that are glossed alongside their occurrences, and they don't recur. The students don't have to remember these words long term. They're a fun word for that lesson, and they're next to the story they apply to. So we've kept them in. We have reglossed words from time to time where the meaning changes ever so slightly, or where we feel like there has been a significant amount of time and we're introducing a verb form, say, between participle and main verb, where we think the student isn't going to make the connection between those two forms because it has been a significant amount of time. Doesn't happen very often across the course, but we have tried to drop it in where it would be helpful for students. So this is a kind of thing that we have been working on for these areas. I would say much bigger has been our overall consideration of the language as a much bigger beast. We have been very much working on the presentation of the language, including reworking the paradigms and examples that occur throughout the books, presenting the language in a better way that students can access in an easier manner, in particular with the idea of building reading skills long term, and also improving independent learning and metacognitive skills by helping students to take responsibility for their own learning, by giving them the tools they need to help themselves as they move through the course. So what do I mean by this? One of the big changes you may notice is in the about the languages, where we first see our paradigms and examples and the exercises. You'll see that the examples have had certain scenarios removed from them entirely. So we've drawn a very clear line between our stories and narratives, which contain challenging content, which contain Roman values and attitudes, and which need to and deserve to be unpacked and talked about, and contain exciting storylines, we hope, and content which can be looked at in more depth. That kind of thing, we didn't want to mirror it in the language content because it makes it lose its power, and it makes it lose its importance and its relevance within context. We were very keen not to decontextualize scenes from the ancient world and present them without the opportunity for them to be discussed and challenged and engaged with in a critical manner. The sentences now will contain similar vocabulary to the stories. They are scenes that the students are familiar with, but there are no longer examples along the lines of the older editions where you will see Roman values being expressed, for example, in master-slave relationships in these sentences. There are a lot more paradigms which have been changed as well. So in the older edition, which is on the left-hand side, you'll see paradigms being used which contain words such as ancilla and servus. These have been replaced with philia and amicus in the new edition. Again, it's just allowing those words, ancilla, servus, to retain their power and their significance within the texts, and taking words which do not have that kind of power underlying them, that depth that requires exploring. It is not a grammatical feature. It's much more than that. So they have gone. You'll also see that the new about the languages have got assistance for our students, so that any terms that are used in these explanations where the students should be assumed to know them, they can actually go and check if they're not sure. They can go and look again. So they can turn to page 25 and find out about the nominative and accusative case again if they've forgotten. So it's just that student is enabled to do their own work here. I've forgotten this. How do I find out? Here's where I go. Glossing has changed slightly, and again, to some extent, we kind of hope you won't notice some of this. Extra information is given around the stories. So, for example, there are suggestions to go and look next to the stories at some information about how you can select the word that you might need for a particular translation. Or there is information about how the glossing has changed now that you know something new. So this is the glossing in stage 14, where words are now used with the nominative, and also there's the infinitive listed for verbs. There is also the occasional note, there's not many, but there's a few, where there's a word that might need a little bit more contextualizing, but they've met it first of all in a story rather than in the cultural background content. So we've just shifted little bits of cultural content next to stories where it's important for the glossing that students understand what it is that they're doing with the language here. There's only a few of these. Mostly it's this kind of glossing, these kind of words are dealt with in the cultural background sections. Also, one change in the glossing is in book transitions, so primarily between units 1 and 2 here. So on the left is the old stage 13 style glossing, which went straight into the new style of glossing, which is the word listed first of all as it is in the story, and second of all either with its nominative singular or with the infinitive, depending on what type of word it is. In the new edition, because stage 13 is a tricky stage, we've got a new family, we've moved to a new place, our stories are getting longer and the sentence structures are getting more complicated. We thought, let's actually give people a bit of a smoother curve on this transition. And so we've retained the book 1 style glossing into unit 2. So in unit 1 into unit 2, the glossing stays similar. So you'll see that on the right-hand side is that it's a good one to compare is aquam, aqua on the left-hand side with water, but just aqua on the right-hand side when it comes up. And also we've got, I'm trying to find another one, kazam at the top here, just the accusative is given. So just taking one point of what on earth is going on, something new is coming my way, away for the students in that transition period. And now the new glossing comes in with the explanatory box in stage 14 instead. In order to aid comprehension, we've done quite a lot of work on thinking about layout. One thing you'll notice straight away is the stories seem to have more paragraphs. We have tried to split up the text on a page so that it is slightly more accessible in that way, and you'll notice the spacing between words and the font also contribute to that, just preventing that wall of text effect that can sometimes happen. Some of the content and the layout is a little bit more complex, but it's there to facilitate learning, and the teacher manual will help you in where there are particular moments of design which are there to help you. I've pulled up stage 13, the new stage 13 here, just to show you some of the things that are going on in these sentences. Some of this has been inherited from older editions, some of it is new. So if we take, for example, sentence set 2 in the model sentences here, you can see that Rufilla est in horto is a lovely book 1, unit 1 sentence there, followed straight up with a construction that is not very unit 1, is much more unit 2, hodie Rufilla non occupata est, moving the s to the end of the sentence, which facilitates comparison with Rufilla quiescere potest. Potest now is directly underneath the word est. So you can see there that just the layout on the page and the sentences are there to enable that comparison, that building up of endings, and mirrored again, we can see in sentence set 3, servi sunt in villa, servi semper occupati sunt, servi quiescere non possunt. So these kind of things you will notice, and like I said, will be in the teacher manual, just there to help you help the students find these patterns and spot what's happening. You'll also see there's a kind of chiastic arrangement to the overall structure with repeated vocabulary across both sets of pages and to facilitate direct comparison between what is happening, who is resting, who is able to rest, who is not able to rest, and who are tired but don't want to sleep, who has agency, who has lack of agency. Again, facilitating not only the linguistic content about wanting and not wanting and being able and not being able, but also wider cultural discussions around the big ideas that are encapsulated in these scenes as well. So hopefully, again, the layout there is facilitating language acquisition and also bigger ideas, bigger concepts. One new section of the book, which is linked to all of this, is Reviewing the Language, which contains a lot of similar content to the old Practicing the Language sections, but it has been moved to the back of the book to enable consolidation to take place, not necessarily at the same point for every student. So these sections are, I think, necessary for good consolidation of language features. It's a really good indicator of whether students have understood or not. But not all students are ready at the same point to consolidate their understanding. Some people need a little more practice. So the reason they've been moved to the back of the book is to enable them to be deployed when students are ready. So they're still coupled to their stage with a title there. So this is stage 15. So you know which content is being consolidated, but the students may be working on stage 17 when they're consolidating stage 15, and that's absolutely fine. Hopefully, this also will consolidate or facilitate their independence as well, and their focus on progression, because we have again given them that extra help along the way. We've revised the instructions. We hope they are a lot more straightforward. Different steps have been written in a much clearer fashion than the old instructions. And also we've given them a little box, a call-out box at the side, to give them help with tackling the activity, as you can see in the top box there, but also where to go for further information if they've forgotten perhaps some key information, or if they simply might need a table to refer to. If they're going to get the correct form of nouns, how on earth do I work out which one's the accusative? Well, it's okay. You can go and look at nouns and it will tell you what you need to know in order to do this activity. Hopefully, this will help students take ownership again for working things out. We've also numbered them, so nouns 1, nouns 2, infinitives 1, infinitives 2, so that if students are struggling with infinitives 2 here, they know where they can go back to have a look at how they were doing it before. Infinitives 1 will give them a starting point. If they look back at their work on infinitives 1, revisit the sentences, revisit their own corrections on that, and then come back to infinitives 2, then they should be able to move forward with a little bit more confidence, having revised the useful information, the useful groundwork they've already laid on these activities. So this is all about student independence, student thinking about their own learning, and giving them the tools to be able to do that for themselves. We're also, alongside these skills sets, looking at the reading skills that students are building up in a bigger context, not just the minutiae of the language, but the skills around reading that are much bigger, about reading the story, as a narrative, about reading it in the context of the ancient world, and also thinking about what they're reading. I sometimes think of it as taking a step back from the sentences, taking a step back to the paragraphs, and then taking a step back to the whole narrative. Now, I could do an entire webinar on reading skills, so we'll put that one to one side, and I'll just talk about the new Practicing the Language sections that we've put in here. So these are short stories that now come at the end of each stage. They're optional. You don't have to tackle them. And they sit next to the main narrative. They sometimes feature the same characters, sometimes don't, but they are not crucial for the main narrative line through. What they do provide is an extra opportunity. The language standard is that of the stage before the one it's in. So this is stage 15 story here, Amicus Fidelis. but the language is pitched at stage 14 with the addition of the new language features for stage 15. So we kind of take them back a step, but also give them a little bit of practice in what they've just learned. The supporting materials in books, so in the textbook, fall under Explore the Story, which are basic comprehension questions asking about the text. And I do apologize here, I've just realized that this is a UK edition. In the North American edition, the Latin is not given next to the question. Okay, so I apologize about this. I have put the wrong image in here. We just give you the question and the line numbers. So 1A is lines 1 to 2. What did the Emperor Claudius do? Apparently, we're giving the UK kids a bit more help at this stage. Make of that what you will. The questions are designed to get the main gist of the narrative along, and also to point at any particularly interesting sentences along the way. The teacher guide material that goes along with this also lists the sentences that might need to go in for help in linguistic features. Hello, sorry. Have we lost my sharing?
No, we
No,
can
we can.
see it.
Okay, cool. Sorry, it went from my screen for a minute there. Okay. Sorry. Here we go. Sorry. Okay. We have also added in 2 new sections alongside the comprehension questions, which are Explore the Language, which is taking a step back from the story, but looking at how the story is being told. So in the earlier units, this is very basic. It's looking at verb forms, for example, and asking students to articulate their understanding of morphology in the story. So it's simply asking them to explain in their own words what they're seeing happening in the story, just getting comfortable with used to doing these things, so that from unit 2 onwards, we can start asking them questions about those features. So about the use of adjectives in a story and what it brings to the overall narrative. So it's quite a complicated set of tasks to do here. Thinking about the story as a story, as a narrative, and talking about it. With the Explore Further, it takes it one step further back from the narrative in this reading skills and says, well, okay, now read this story in the context of the ancient world. Let's think about what's going on here in the context of relationships between characters, between places, and other things that they've been learning about the world the story was taking place in. We have a skill set, it's listed again in the teacher manual, that we're building towards here, which is a set of literary skills really for dealing with authentic text. When students get to unit 3, the second half of unit 3 contains practicing the language stories, which are actually tiered texts of authentic Latin literature. And at that point, we will be asking them these types of questions on these levels, the close analysis, explore the story, what's happening type questions, the analysis of presentation of style, of literary features, and also reading it in context. So trying to really get them to think of it as a process from unit 1 all the way through to reading authentic texts, adapted in unit 3, and then the unadapted as you have had in unit 4. So there we go. And alongside this, we really are encouraging students to think of themselves as participators in reading the text. That the textbooks that are dialogic tools, they're not a repository of wisdom to be consumed, they're something to engage with. And that their role involves making intentional choices about what they do with the language they meet. So they're not only translating as if it were a neutral act, because it's not. It requires taking the ancient world and turning it into something that you're expressing using your world. And alongside that, we're also asking them to deliberately engage throughout from unit 1 with the choices that other people have made and how they present the ancient world. I'll give you some examples. The stories have deliberately always been written, I think, but particularly the new ones that we have put in order to provoke engagement and to get students talking about the ancient world and the presentation of the ancient world. There are stories where people have different opinions. They'll definitely have different opinions from the students. They'll have different opinions from each other. And there'll be contexts that need explored. As I've put here, the students will need to interrogate the story to find out what's happening and why. There are stories where people deliberately say nothing or conceal all of the facts from another character. It's not because we've made a mistake and we forgot to say it. The character has made that choice. And this is something that will need to be pointed at. And again, Teacher Manual will give you guidance on what to do with these things. But if we take the story in the middle, Romanus Vulneratus, from Unit 2, Stage 13, replacing the old Thaesaroi, the Romans here are in the background of that first picture, a column of Romans with the wounded Salvius in the middle, making their way through a field next to a British roundhouse here. And the father and son watching them go. Following a conversation about the fact that one of the Romans is wounded, the mother who has come out of the house says, Eheu, omnes Romani sunt infesti, sed Romanus vulneratus est infestior quam ceteri. And the filius, the son, says, Cur? And the parents say nothing in reply. This story obviously requires some stepping back and consideration of it in a bigger context in order for it to make sense, not as an additional extra, but as an integral part of reading it. And that is something we wanted to really push in these stories, is that the narrative is big, the world is big, and we need to just make sure that we're looking at the stories in context, because otherwise we can't understand them. We've carried that into the sections, the cultural background sections in each stage. You can see that top right there. And the fact that where we have an author like Tacitus here, recording a speech from Boudica, of course, it's Tacitus inventing the words for somebody else. And we've made that clear through the drawing, that what we have here is a report of somebody else's words. And again, we're just saying to people, saying to the students, embedding it throughout, that people don't say everything, that people say other people's words, and that the presentation we have of material is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of a discussion. And that is just how you read Latin. It's not just what's on the page, it's what's around what's on the page that matters just as much as the words themselves. And so hopefully we've embedded that throughout. We've also made this intentional vocabulary choices part of the textbook, in that there is discussion on this. So I showed you the call out before that said about choosing words and how to deal with different word meanings. There are sections next to the vocabulary in each of the units that will give specific guidance to students about how to do that. So examples on if a word has different meanings, how do you pick which one you need? But also where the word has different meanings and they kind of mean something really similar. How are you going to pick? What tone do you want to create in your translation? Is that a meaning the person who said that word in the story would ascribe to it? You know, how do we decide which English word we are going to use to express that Latin meaning? It's quite a complicated conversation, and so we have dedicated time to it. And also, specifically, what can we replace this with if it sounds bizarre in English today, like mihi placet, for example, as the example here in this stage, which is a very useful conversation. And the practicing the language builds on this idea that the translator or the narrator, and of course translators are narrators, is an important person in the story, because their presentation of the material you know, is a choice that needs explored. So we see that throughout the practicing the language exercises, where in some cases they explore the language, looking at how an author is making their writing more exciting. What choices has the author used? We use the word author, narrator, or the name of the person who did it frequently throughout the book to remind students that somebody did this, somebody is telling the story. To stories where we have actual named narrators from the narrative. Volubilis tells us a bit about Egypt. and why is he reliable or unreliable as a narrator? What things will he tell us from his point of view? And how do they differ perhaps from somebody else's reading of the same situation? To finally also thinking about why people use the words that they do in a different context. Here, this is Unit 3, where Rufus and Quintus are talking to each other about their own challenges with their relationships with their fathers, and they're trying to bond with each other, and they use language in order to bond with each other. So I think, oh, I'm not done too badly on time, have I? That's been a headline sort of whistle-stop tour through some of the big things. Like I said at the beginning, there is more, and I'm happy to field questions to talk about things. And if anybody is desperate to see the many spreadsheets I've created, please don't. You don't want that in your life, but I am happy to share things with anyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. That was a brilliant overview. Okay, so if anyone does have questions, it's the Q&A box, which you'll find down in the bottom on your toolbar. So I'll give anyone who wants to ask a question a moment.
And we also have the smallest member of the CSCP team has just arrived. So yeah, this is Spook.
Very cute.
Sorry about
that. Okay, so we have a question from Katie. Will the practicing the language activities also be available via the Cambridge Go platform?
At the moment, the practicing the language. So do you mean the old ones or the new ones? So the stories or the exercises? Sorry to ask. I can answer both.
The exercises.
The exercises. At the moment, we are looking at how we present them. So there are a set of digital exercises that go along with these, and the intention is that they're available. But we are looking at whether the current way in which those exercises are done is the best way. So we can give you an update at a later point in that, but the intention is there, but I'll be honest, we're not entirely happy with how the old ones worked. We think there were some problems with them, and we're looking at how to improve it further.
Thanks, Lisa. Another question from Katie. Have assessments been built out yet for the 6th edition?
So there are assessments as before. So we are currently working on the assessment packages for those, and there will be assessments as before.
Thanks. Okay, so I think that's probably all the questions that we have. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you everyone for joining. This session was the final one in our full webinar series. As I mentioned before, the recording for this and for all the previous sessions will be, or already are, up on the landing page. And I've just put the link to that in the chat box. This session will be added in a couple of days, but you will also get an email with the recording of this session straight to your inbox because you registered. So we hope that you'll join us again in the spring when we'll run another series of webinars. You'll hear more about the digital resources and how they have changed and improved. And you'll see how you're able to assign activities and to track student progress as well. And you'll also hear more about using the 6th edition in your classroom. So look out for announcements coming next year about what those webinars will cover. And also, if you have specific things that you want to hear about, it would be fantastic to hear from you as well. What do you want us to cover? You can always email us if you have questions. I'm just going to grab the email address. It's the Caecilius@cambridge.org email address. I was going to copy and paste it, but I haven't got it handily in front of me, unfortunately. But I will type it in.